There's a poem written by a very famous English poet at the end of the 19th century. It was said to echo in Churchill's brain in the 1930s. And the poem goes, "High upon the hill of summer, lazy with the flow of streams, hark, I hear a distant drummer drumming like a sound in dreams. Far and near and low and louder on the roads of earth go by, dear to friend and food to powder, soldiers marching soon to die." Those who are interested in poetry, the poem is The Shropshire Lad, written by A.E. Housman. But what Housman understood, and you hear it in the symphonies of Nielsen too, was that the long, hot, sylvan summers of stability of the 19th century were coming to a close, and that we were about to move into one of those terrifying periods of history when power changes. And these are always periods, ladies and gentlemen, accompanied by turbulence and all too often by blood. And my message for you is that I believe we are condemned, if you like, to live at just one of those moments in history, when the gimbals upon which the established order of power is beginning to change, and the new look of the world, the new powers that exist in the world, are beginning to take form. And these are, and we see it very clearly today, nearly always highly turbulent times, highly difficult times, and all too often very bloody times. By the way, it happens about once every century. You might argue that the last time it happened, and that's what Housman felt coming and what Churchill felt too, was that when power passed from the old nations, the old powers of Europe, across the Atlantic to the new emerging power of the United States of America, the beginning of the American century. But let's talk about the shifts of power that are occurring to the world. And what is happening today is in one sense frightening, because it's never happened before. We have seen lateral shifts of power, the power of Rome, the power of Greece passed to Rome, and the power shifts that occurred during the European civilizations. But we're seeing something slightly different. For power is not just moving laterally from nation to nation, it's also moving vertically. What's happening today is that the power that was encased, held to accountability, held to the root of law, within the institutions of the nation state, has now migrated in very large measure onto the global stage. The globalization of power, we talked about the globalization of markets, but actually it's the globalization of real power. And where at the nation-state level that power is held to accountability, subject to the rule of law, on the international stage it is not. The international stage, on the global stage, where power now resides, the power of the internet, the power of the satellite broadcasters, the power of the money changers, these vast, huge money go round that circulates now 32 times the amount of money necessary for the trade it's supposed to be there to finance. The money changers, if you like, the financial speculators that have brought us all to our knees quite recently. The power of the multinational corporations now developing budgets often larger than medium-sized countries. These live in a global space which is largely unregulated. Today in our modern world, because of the internet, because of the kind of things people have been talking about here, everything is connected to everything. We are now interdependent. We are now interlocked as nations, as individuals, in a way which has never been the case before. Never been the case before. You know, the interrelationship of nations, well, it's always existed. Diplomacy is about managing the interrelationship of nations. But now we are intimately locked together. You get swine flu in Mexico, it's a problem for Charles de Gaulle Airport 24 hours later. Lehman Brothers goes down, the whole lot collapses. There are fires in the steppes of Russia, food riots in Africa. We are all now deeply, deeply, deeply interconnected. And what that means is that the idea of the nation state acting alone, not connected with others, not working with others, is no longer a viable proposition, because the actions of a nation state are neither confined to itself, nor is it sufficient for the nation state itself to control its own territory, because the effects outside the nation state are now beginning to affect what happens inside them. I was a young soldier in the last of the small empire wars of Britain. At that time, the defense of my country was about one thing, and one thing only. How strong was our army, how strong was our air force, how strong was our navy, how strong were our allies. That was when the enemy was outside the walls. Now the enemy is inside the walls. Now, if I want to talk about the defense of my country, I have to speak to the Minister of Health, because pandemic disease is a threat to my security. I had to speak to the Minister of Agriculture because food security is a threat to my security. I had to speak to the Minister of Industry because the fragility of our high-tech infrastructure is now a point of attack for our enemies, as we see from cyber warfare. I had to speak to the Minister of Home Affairs because who has entered my country, who lives in that terraced house in that inner city, has a direct effect on what happens in my country, as we in London saw in the 7/7 bombings. It's no longer the case that the security of a country is simply a matter for its soldiers and its Ministry of Defense. It's its capacity to lock together its institutions. And this tells you something very important. It tells you that, in fact, our governments, vertically constructed in the economic model of the Industrial Revolution, vertical hierarchy, specialization of tasks, command structures, have got the wrong structures completely. You in business know that the paradigm structure of our time, ladies and gentlemen, is the network. It's your capacity to network that matters, both within your governments and externally. So here is Ashdown's third law. By the way, don't ask me about Ashdown's first law and second law, because I haven't invented those yet. It always sounds better if there's a third law, doesn't it? Ashdown's third law is that in the modern age, where everything is connected to everything, the most important thing about what you can do is what you can do with others. The most important bit about your structure, whether you're a government, whether you're an army regiment, whether you're a business, is your docking points, your interconnectors, your capacity to network with others. You understand that in industry, governments don't. But now one final thing. If it is the case, ladies and gentlemen, and it is, that we are now locked together in a way that has never been quite the same before, then it's also the case that we share a destiny with each other. Suddenly, and for the very first time, collective defense, the thing that has dominated us as the concept of securing our nations, is no longer enough. It used to be the case that if my tribe was more powerful than their tribe, I was safe. My country was more powerful than their country, I was safe. My alliance, like NATO, was more powerful than their alliance, I was safe. It is no longer the case. The advent of the interconnectedness and of the weapons of mass destruction means that increasingly I share a destiny with my enemy. And so suddenly, ladies and gentlemen, what has been the proposition of visionaries and poets down the ages becomes something we have to take seriously as a matter of public policy. I started with a poem, I'll end with one. The great poem of John Donne's, "Send not for whom the bell tolls." The poem is called "No Man is an Island," and it goes, "Every man's death affecteth me, for I am involved in mankind. Send not to ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." For John Donne, a recommendation of morality. For us, I think, part of the equation for our survival. Thank you very much.